around the world. So let's get right into the first topic I want to talk to you about.
Sure.
Which is weather modification and natural disasters. Do we as humans have any control over these elements? And if so, can that control be used to, manipulate governments and humanity as a whole?
Okay, weather modification is a big topic, and it's not happening by coincidence. It's because we're seeing a lot of weird things, even here in California where we're sitting. Weird things have been happening over the past few years. We're talking about floods, fires, earthquakes, small-scale tsunamis, and a lot of these things were predicted in advance. Now we have to ask the question, how do people know? It's not because they're prophets. It's because there are plans that are being executed with certain intentions and agendas that are happening all around the world.
Do you mean things like climate change?
Let's start, if you want to go to climate change for a second, the climate's always changing. The climate's always been changing. The hoax behind the climate change narrative is why and how they say it's changing. Because we know that there was an ice age, and we know that now there isn't. And back when things started melting from the ice age to now, it's not because of pollution. It's because things change. So it used to be called global warming. It had to be changed to be called climate change because it wasn't fitting the narrative of always warming every single year. So they just went to something that was more neutral and called it climate change. And there's an agenda behind that. So let's start changing the way that people use technology. Let's move from gas into electricity. It's not exactly what we're being told, and there's a big illusion being painted over here, but we'll put that to the side for now. Weather modification, a lot of people have for a long time been calling, it's nonsense, it's a conspiracy theory. I think it was back in 2019, right before COVID started. It was in August of 2019. I got really sick. And Ray comes to my house. Ray, as you know, as everybody probably knows, is the guy who, we'll call him like my mentor, my guide, my teacher in many ways, whatever you want to call him. He comes to my house and he says, I know you're sick. It's not what you think it is. And I'm coming to your house to help you out. I'm like, okay. He sits there and he tells me, Jason, you're going to see over the next few months something start that looks like a pandemic. It's not what they're telling you it is. You're also going to see what seems to be natural disasters. They're not natural, they're planned. He told me about a series of earthquakes that was happening at the exact depth of 10 kilometers, with the exact dates and locations of where they were going to happen. He told me that there were going to be fires in Australia that seemed to be calculated because of how they actually broke out. He told me that there were going to be fires in California. And he said in New York City, among other places around America and the whole world, will shut down. And that's when I looked at him and I said, dude, that's not going to happen. And suddenly I started seeing the fires in California. And I started seeing the fires in Australia. And they had a name to those fires in Australia because of how intense they were. It was super unusual a few years ago. Now that has to do with something called HAARP, H-A-A-R-P. There's other things called cloud seeding. Cloud seeding is a way of seeding the clouds with salt and a few other chemicals to make it rain more. They do this in Dubai and Abu Dhabi right now because they need more rain. So there are known technologies with why they say they're using them. And then there's what's actually going on. They do come out and say we're using things like stratospheric aerosol injections, which is injecting aerosols into the stratosphere to create a chemical cloud in order to stop global warming. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard in my life. They're basically creating a chemical cloud. They also acknowledge that with SAIs, stratospheric aerosol injections, when you do that, you can also cause a lot of problems for other countries. John Brennan, the ex-director and head of the CIA, spoke about this at the Council of Foreign Relations. He spoke about this publicly. It's on camera. So what I'm sharing with you right now is not a conspiracy. It's something that you can look into, and they acknowledge weather modification is a real thing. Even Wikipedia, that lies to us, speaks about this. So they've acknowledged that weather modification is a thing. The negative side of that is if we have the power to make it rain, we also have the power to make it flood. If we have the power to make it flood, we also have the power to destroy certain populations, certain nations, certain economies. If you have the power to do that, we're just talking about rain right now, they also have the power to create fires. That's using technologies like electromagnetic laser pulsation. You can actually, and there are pictures of this, shooting lasers using electromagnetic laser pulsation from space. You're using satellites to do things like that, and targeting certain areas to create fire. You looked at what happened in Lahaina. I was just there in Maui. There was a perfect ring of fire around the city. That's not how a forest fire happens. That's called direct energy weapons, DEWs, DEWs. So everything that you're seeing, by the way, if you look at the certain celebrities' homes on that island, because a lot of them live there, they're all painted with the same color blue, and it's a specific variation of the color blue. And if I take laser technology to try and make a fire, it will not burn that color blue. So there's a lot of intentions of why you're seeing things happen. Destroying economies, destroying nations, weakening stock markets, weakening financial systems, weakening people and having them become more dependent on something like what would eventually become a one world order.
All right, so you've talked about fire and rain, but what about like earthquakes, volcanoes, tsunamis? Can they be controlled as well?
Let's talk about an earthquake logically, right? Because I always tell everybody, don't believe a word that comes out of my mouth. Let's use logic so you can discern it in your own way. A tsunami is created by an earthquake. What is an earthquake? A shift of tectonic plates. If you wanted to create an earthquake, what would you have to do? You would have to create a shift in tectonic plates. How would you go about doing that? Well, if you take a large bomb, you put it under the ocean floor, you put it on the ocean floor in the right spot and you blow it up, you will shift the tectonic plates. You create an earthquake that's strong enough to produce a massive tsunami, and that tsunami can be targeted to take out New York, Boston Harbor, California. Now we can go into the realms of how certain things are stopped. Because remember, just like you have the negative polarities and negative individuals doing negative things, law of balance will tell you that you have the opposite side as well. That's where TLS comes in. Now we're going into a problem of consciousness and a corrupted consciousness. Why somebody would not care to hurt somebody else for their own personal gain. We see it anywhere from low levels of individuals that are willing to shoot people for $50 at a gas station. And we see it on high levels. It's the same consciousness with different resources. So you could do it on a much larger scale. So again, just like we know it exists in places like Brooklyn, the Bronx, we see it happen in places like California. It exists on a much higher level as well, just to ground that into reality so it doesn't sound like it's something crazy. Because when you say there's this group of billionaires and elites that are coming and taking over the world, it sounds like a crazy thing. But when you connect that consciousness to the consciousness that we already know on a much lower level, it's very possible. Call them sociopaths, psychopaths, whatever you want. They're individuals that don't really care if a few people die. Now, just like I can take technology and use it for good, I could take that same technology and use it for bad. And that's what we've been seeing over the past few thousand years, repurposing technology, repurposing certain knowledge and awareness to be used for corrupted purposes instead of productive purposes. So when you have that in the world, the greater the darkness is, the greater the light is as well. You have more right to do certain things when there's more darkness. Just like the greater the light is, the greater the darkness will be. It's just a law of balance. So the organization that I work with, the Light System, is one of many who are responsible for doing whatever they can along the way to stop natural disasters.
So do TLS find out this information psychically, or do they get the intel?
Maybe it's what you said, but I can tell you for a fact that they have people within undercover as one of them. They have people within the Rothschild clan. They have people within the FBI. They have people within the CIA. They have people within the Mossad. They have people within the White House. They have people within the Pentagon, within NASA. Anything you can think of, they have somebody in there doing something one way or another. It's like the Trojan horse. You need to infiltrate the monster from within. So that's how they get it.
And what can TLS do to prevent this from happening in the first place?
You know, there's many different ways of going about stopping things, but when we focus on the world of what the world really is, energy, frequency, and vibration, they use the awareness of the world of energy, frequency, and vibration, the non-physical world, the intangible world, the spiritual world, whatever you want to call it, to manipulate energies to stop certain things or cause certain things to happen. So let's say there's somebody sitting in front of me that is responsible for creating a plan of having a nuclear bomb deep within the ocean to create a tectonic shift, create an earthquake, to create a tsunami. TLS will come in. They will use language and the power of thought, but specifically the medium of speech, to help manipulate certain things, because speech is one of the most powerful tools we have. They use a book, and this is, I'm sure, one of many different ways that they do this, but there's a book in Hebrew. It's actually written in Aramaic called Sefer HaYetzirah. In English, it's called the Book of Creation. It's believed to be written by Abraham. It's using the understanding and the energy of discovered languages, versus created languages. Languages that are discovered are languages that are based on mathematics. Again, this is its own conversation of itself, so we can go into that if you'd like. But in many cases, that's how they'll do certain things. They'll get the awareness of what's going on through intel, whatever it may be, and then they'll send certain individuals, in many cases, in this specific case, they'll send people like Ray to do certain things, what people would call supernatural things, in order to manipulate the energy of the tsunami to lower it, to lower its impact.
Is it possible to, get to the person before committing the crime to influence their decision?
What you're talking about now, that's called transducing. Transducing, just for lack of a better phrase, it is a form of mind control. So Ray, for example, was buddy-buddy over the past 12 months with Jacob Rothschild. They didn't know who Ray was. He came under the disguise of spiritual counsel, and his job was to use transducing on Jacob Rothschild specifically to get him to stop doing things. But that's not about natural disasters. That's about the financial system. Part of transducing. That's how you can do certain things. You can erase memory. You can induce memories. You can create memories. You can cause people to think certain things. You can influence them to make different decisions. But that is only to be used in specific situations. Because if the wrong person gets a hold of that, you can create a whole lot of chaos on this planet.
Okay, so that's incredible. But what if it's too late? The event is going to happen. What can TLS do in that sort of situation?
The main one that I would want to speak about is, again, using the medium of language, using the medium of what some people would hear as prayer. You know those like ancient civilizations, aboriginals, they use the rain dance to bring rain? Okay, we look at that and we think it's crazy. It's not. It's using discovered languages based on mathematics to manipulate energy, frequency, and vibration to cause what you want and stop what you don't. It's a whole topic in and of itself that I can give you examples of in Aramaic and Hebrew, and understanding where it all comes from to ground it into reality. Because if I just say, you can use the medium of language to change the weather, sounds crazy. If I can explain what language actually is, explain it from a scientific perspective with actual studies that I could share with you here today, you'll understand in a very real way, in a proven way, with no theories whatsoever, how language is the medium, is the bridge between thought and matter.
So I'm interested to know, and hopefully you can share this, but do you have any examples of where TLS has stepped in to stop something like these, quote, natural disasters happening in the past?
Off the top of my head, tsunami in New York, tsunami in Boston Harbor, basically something that was supposed to take out both of them. Ray actually spoke about that in Disclosure. I think it was Disclosure Part 3, where he spoke about that specifically when it comes to natural disasters. Now, when there are fires, if they can't stop it, they'll do their best to mitigate certain things along the way. I know that sometimes they fail also. That's very important to acknowledge. There's still people that can make mistakes. They're not perfect. Those like ancient civilizations, aboriginals, they use the rain dance to bring rain. Okay, we look at that and we think it's crazy. It's not. It's using discovered languages based on mathematics to manipulate energy, frequency, and vibration to cause what you want and stop what you don't. It's a whole topic in and of itself that I can give you examples of in Aramaic and Hebrew, and understanding where it all comes from to ground it into reality. Because if I just say, you can use the medium of language to change the weather, sounds crazy. If I can explain what language actually is, explain it from a scientific perspective with actual studies that I could share with you here today, you'll understand in a very real way, in a proven way, with no theories whatsoever, how language is the medium, is the bridge between thought and matter.
So I'm interested to know, and hopefully you can share this, but do you have any examples of where TLS has stepped in to stop something like these, quote, natural disasters happening in the past?
Off the top of my head, tsunami in New York, tsunami in Boston Harbor, basically something that was supposed to take out both of them. Ray actually spoke about that in Disclosure. I think it was Disclosure Part 3, where he spoke about that specifically when it comes to natural disasters. Now, when there are fires, if they can't stop it, they'll do their best to mitigate certain things along the way. I know that sometimes they fail also. There's still people that can make mistakes. They're not perfect. And sometimes they intervene, they succeed. And sometimes they're not allowed to intervene. They can't. I don't understand those laws and those nuances completely. And sometimes they intervene and they fail. One of those situations was Lahaina in Maui. That shouldn't have happened. That was direct energy weaponry. That's what was used over there to create that problem. You speak about that on social media, they completely censor you. They will delete your account. They choose what to fact check. And weather modification is a big one because it's a massive vehicle to be used in order to bring forth this agenda and what they're trying to create on this planet. All to bring us to a point of control. It's all about control. It's all about money. It's all about power, but mainly control around the world. And they've done a hell of a job over the past few years. They've done a great job. They've shown us how they've controlled billions of people all around the world. And many of us don't even ask questions. And those that do, they don't really care enough to go deeper because we're so busy in the debt environment that they've created for us, where we just need to manage how are we going to feed our children? How are we going to bring food back? It's a slave society that they've created over here. So even the things that become apparent that they're doing, we don't even have time to deal with it. When somebody has 3 jobs and they're trying to figure out what do I do and how do I make this work, they're not going to be thinking about who's modifying the weather. But it's who's modifying the weather that's causing them to have 3 jobs in the first place to be a slave. And that's what needs to change. It's so many different factors that come together to understand what's actually going on, how this is all happening, and when we can reverse engineer the problem, that's how you find a solution. But you have to pay attention to the problem, understand how it's been created, so we can understand how to deconstruct it, to decompose it, instead of further perpetuate it. And that's why awareness is so important.
Okay, you've touched on this a few times, and that is using language to manipulate the environment and consciousness itself. So I'd love to know more about this language and, if there's a way that humanity as a whole can access this power.
Yeah, it's something that we're doing already. We just don't know that we're doing it. And language it's a massive topic when it comes to understanding the significance of speech and how one can use speech as a tool to create or destroy. It's a very, very big part of how TLS does what they do. Maybe not the only part, but it's a big part that at least I understand enough to be able to explain and ground into reality, not just to understand how they do it, but to understand what we can do in our own personal lives. When we understand these fundamental rules and laws and how things work, forget about taking how to change the weather to stop something. What about how to change your life to create something that you want? It's all the same thing used in different ways. So I'm more than happy to touch up on that.